Have you ever been at a wedding where it was obvious to you the couple was doomed? What happened? Well, it wasn't so much only the wedding. Though I was best man at it, it was obvious the whole relationship was doomed when I learned this. Important to note, the groom was a hardcore stoner. 1. She demanded before they got married that he quit smoking weed. She was strenuously anti-drug. 2. He had no intention of doing so, but was convinced he could hide it from her, so starting out with a lie, and one that was bound to be found out. 3. He was horrible at hiding it when he was stoned. They were divorced 9 months later after she caught him smoking in his car in the driveway. So stupid, the whole thing. Why people get into these relationships I have no idea. I was at a wedding as a videographer. Bride was really happy and everything, but the groom seemed disinterested and bored. Filmed the ceremony and everything, and we need some shots of the guests mingling. My buddy says he hasn't got any footage of the groom and asks if I've seen him. I say no but offer to walk around and look. I eventually find the groom way down by the lake sitting on a bench and chatting with one of the bridesmaids. They don't notice me, but I see them share a kiss. Mentioned it to my buddy who just shrugged and said we were there to film the wedding so it's not our concern. It would have been interesting if you taken a picture of them kissing and just added it to the pictures of the wedding. They stayed together, but they hate each other. A friend from long ago called me up to be a groomsman. I was his friend back when we were in elementary school and hadn't thought about him in years. But okay, I get there and my friend has changed dramatically and for the worse. Or maybe it was that he hadn't changed. He was still an elementary school kid, only bitter. I figure I'll enjoy the party, see some old pals, and get through it. This isn't my train wreck to stop. The first time I saw my pal interact with his soon-to-be wife I knew there was gonna be problems. They swore at each other, in front of everyone, at their arranged parties. Not like you're so freaking hot and stuff, but you're freaking dumpy kind of stuff. I admit, I went to the wedding just to see what would happen. They have 2 kids, they hate each other, and I have no idea why they stay with each other. Maybe they just both like being angry all the time? They have 2 kids, they hate each other, and I have no idea why they stay with each other. There's the reason. Spoiler alert. This is a terrible reason to stay together. My friends. 12 people literally sat at a table at the reception and formed a pool for how long it would last. Shortest guess was 1 month. Longest was 2 years. I had 15 months. The divorce was announced at 2 years. 1 month later, we decided all bets were off. Went to a wedding where the groom accidentally spilled champagne on the bride's dress. Now she's probably not the only bridezilla out there who would go apeshit, but this turned nasty in a matter of seconds. It started with her being irate over the dress, to blaming him for everything wrong with the wedding, which no one noticed. Issues with his family followed, and to top it all off she questioned his mental health. He'd had problems in the past. All this while screaming at the top of her lungs in front of about 150 people. Poor guy never stood a chance. My sister and her husband. They met each other our junior year of high school and she moved in with him halfway through our senior year. I never liked him and did not hide that fact. I especially didn't like him after he hit on me while they were dating. Didn't hide that fact either, but my sister brushed me off. Before he popped the question, she found out he'd been texting other girls. He promised he'd change. The wedding was a train wreck. Honestly, it was a small affair in our backyard, with her aunt officiating. The aunt started crying midway through the ceremony. My stepmother read a poem about them she wrote halfway through the ceremony. She always wants to be the center of attention. The groom's drunken father, who had been barred from the wedding, came stumbling in at some point during the vows to search for alcohol, and I saw the groom grab one of the bridesmaids' asses. I didn't point that out to my deliriously happy stepsister. I should have. A year later it turned out the groom had been sexting my stepmom. My sister somehow forgave both of them. She has low self-esteem. They got caught again a year after that. At that point my dad had divorced my stepmother, so I have been distant from this whole shebang. But my sister, who I do still talk to, finally divorced that scumbag. Divorce for everyone. Let's pull an Oprah. The bride ugly cried the entire reception until the groom and her mom got into a yelling fight about it. They both made it clear the only reason they got married was because she was pregnant with their second child. The best man of a different race. It's relevant. Seemed very jumpy the entire time. Fast forward to 6 months later, and the baby is clearly biracial. Less than a year after the wedding, bride and groom are divorced and she's with the best man. My sister-in-law's first wedding. Never really liked the groom from the first time I met him. After a year or so, he proposed. They started planning their wedding that was to take place in a year. But then, on whim, they get married in a civil ceremony with plans to still have the big ceremony later in the year. A few months after the civil ceremony, the groom goes in for heart surgery. Bad valve he's had since he was born. The big ceremony finally comes except every major aspect of it has been stripped away. Less than a year into the marriage, my sister-in-law brings me a credit card bill and asks me if she knows what this $600 charge her husband has on it. A little internet research and I find that he's tipping cam girls. They're officially divorced about a year after that. In retrospect, it became obvious what had happened. My sister-in-law was grifted for a new heart valve. He didn't have the insurance at his job to cover the surgery, so he convinced her to marry him, earlier than expected, to get on her insurance, get the heart surgery, and then split. I was a bridesmaid in my brother's wedding a few years back. The bride was okay throughout their relationship, but it felt very superficial, and she had done small things that signaled that she wasn't a very kind person, like refusing to take an obviously suffering pet cat to the vet because it's just a cat. She had the money, she just didn't care at all. My brother did it for her in the end and wound up keeping the cat. But back to the story. Leading up to the wedding, she got snipper, which we all brushed off as nerves, but she was being straight mean to her other Sil, who was literally doing everything. Sil planned the bachelorette party exactly as my bro's wife wanted. Bro's wife pouts because we were talking to each other as well as her and just stands up and leaves. Just friggin' leaves. Other Sil is clearly very hurt, and we did our best to cheer her up, but she had to share an awkward hotel room with bro's wife, so yay. The rehearsal comes, and bro's wife sends Sil out to do all the last minute errands that bro's wife was supposed to do, but didn't because she's decided it wasn't her job but didn't tell anyone. So flowers, decorations, tons of stuff was missing and Sil was blitzing to retrieve it. We didn't know until bro's wife both bragged about what she did, and then bitched about how Sil was late, useless, etc. I told her Sil was doing everything for her, she should be grateful, and then left while she was screeching. Day of the wedding. She's miserable, barely smiles, everyone out for everything, refuses to dance at the reception beyond the first dance because she wanted to pout over unknown reasons. Tears open the gifts to see who was cheap and who was worthy, and then flounced out while leaving trash everywhere. I don't know how, but she and my brother remained married for about 5 years. She was just nasty the whole time. My brother is also a turd, but dang, she really went all out to out-turd him. So she's gone, and we're all much happier without her. Still keep in touch with her brother and his wife, other Sil, though, because they're great folks. Sounds like a classic narcissist. The couple came to see me by appointment to choose wedding music for their ceremony. There, in the church choir loft, they got into a heated argument over each piece of music under consideration. From the wedding processional to the recessional, there was zero agreement or willingness to compromise with each other. To try to bring some harmony, I suggested that the bride choose the organ processional and the groom select the recessional, even though they strongly disagreed with each other. Same with other music for the occasion. That worked for the moment. In less than 6 months, the pastor informed me that the couple was back to see him for counseling, with divorce under consideration. Wait, the pastor, who presumably should be keeping confidence, freaking told you that? I think I spotted the real butthole of the story. Got invited to a wedding of an ex-girlfriend. There was one of those cheesy dollar dance things where bride and groom shake down the crowd for more money. Fine, I suck it up and dance with the ex for a $5. During the dance, she whispers this should have been you. Freak out time. I left very quickly after that. Needless to say, they didn't last. My college girlfriend decided to marry her back home HS boyfriend. Fine, whatever. She invites me to the wedding. Fine, whatever. I go to the wedding, and her father, very loudly at the reception, pounds me on the back and announces, "That should have been you up there." They were married for 23 or so years. Then he divorces her, and she switches teams. My wife and I had thought this one couple wouldn't last. The groom gave off a creepy vibe. We gave them 2 years maximum. 2 years came and they were expecting a baby, so we gave them another few years. Few more years came and another child was on the way. Then about a year later the crap hit the fan. Our initial thoughts were correct. Dude was creepy and hiding some sketchy crap from his past. Lied about a lot of things, like his education. This explains why he always worked the lowest position in their line of work. They both work in the medical field. He claimed he had a degree, which would put him at a much better paying position. But he kept working the bottom tier, practically volunteer, job. Money was a huge issue for them, and she made the bulk of their combined income. Education isn't the be all and all, I would know. I have an MA and make less than $50K per year. Still, lying to your wife for years. Dang, that's kinda pathetic. My father-in-law was getting remarried in his late 60s. His wife died 20 years earlier to cancer. She was married 3 times prior. Twice divorce, once to death. When we met the new girlfriend at the time, 2/3 of the children told him point blank that she wasn't a good match for dad. Of course, he didn't want to see it, and took out a loan of $20,000 to repair her house. The thing is, he's super stubborn, as in he is clearly in the wrong with evidence supported, and he will still argue at 20 minutes. And he's a yeller. If I raise my voice, then I'm alright. She is also stubborn and extremely religious. He is also religious, but she took it to an 11. Anytime they would get together while my wife and I were there was always a screaming match going on. They would find the littlest thing and start going off at each other. Well, it never did get better. Weeks leading up to the wedding just added more fuel as they had more things to shout about. The day of the wedding it felt really tense, very smiling through their teeth. They hardly came back from their honeymoon when he approached my wife and I asking for advice. She served the divorce papers 2 months later, and he's still doing payments on her roof. All of my interesting stories came from my time as an event server. Honestly, I felt like a lot of the weddings I saw at that event hall represented the culmination of 2 people's most expensive mistake of their lives. Co-workers and I routinely placed bets on which ones would last the year. Our manager even told us about one time when they called a couple to clear up some minor details regarding the wedding a few months prior, only to find that couple was no longer married. I have to say, though, that the best, worst, take your pick, Mo speech I have ever heard was the one where the Mo had formerly dated the groom. And she said this in the speech, and she also mentioned that it hadn't worked out between them for a laundry list of reasons, which unfortunately for my nightly entertainment she did not delve into. And then she threw in a few wink wink nudge nudge comments about the groom's sexual performance. The bride looked furious the whole time this speech was happening, and made a beeline for the bar as soon as it was socially acceptable. Can you blame her? The groom, meanwhile, is super awkwardly, suspiciously, avoiding eye contact with his former lover, and the last thing I witnessed between the happy couple was a tense exchange interspersed with both of them chugging their drinks. Yet, I wouldn't place any bets on that one. I mixed up maid of honor with mother of the bride, so this could have definitely been worse. I was the guest of the bride who was a co-worker and we also were running partners. I was at the hotel bar the night before the wedding and the groom drunkenly touched my leg to feel my running muscles. They didn't even last 2 years. Welp, this one's depressing. They got married because she was pregnant and they wanted to give the kid a good foundation, yada yada. However, before she was pregnant, she was a heavy drinker and a little too reckless with heavy drugs. There was a night they hung out with me before she got pregnant that made it clear that they had a lot to work on. Not going to get into specifics, but it was a bad night. A few weeks later she was pregnant. All the friends pretty unanimously thought it would end badly, but she sobered up while she was pregnant and it really looked like things were looking up. The marriage was very sweet. Everyone enjoyed themselves, and it felt like a wedding should. We were all remaining cautiously hopeful about them. Sometimes having a kid really does bring out the good in a couple and gives them something greater than themselves to focus on. But this time it didn't. After their son was born, she got right back into drinking and drugs and soon she wasn't even staying at the house anymore. He tried to force it to work a few times, but it was over before they had been married a year. She overdosed and died at some new guy's house. She was only 21. It sucked because we did get to see a brief period of what they could have been while she was pregnant, but then it all went south. Also, I think we all still feel a little guilty that we assumed the relationship would fail in the beginning. On a more positive note, the baby is awesome. He has a lot of people that will be there to support him in his life, and my friend is a kick-butt dad. I'll admit I'm relieved. Reading the first paragraph, I was expecting a kid born with either fetal alcohol syndrome or drug addiction. My best mate and his girlfriend, they were from polar opposite sides of the world, with the bride some 10,000 miles from home. They were both located in a country that was not where they were born. They did not speak the language and they both were under immense strain. The bride had other issues too that I won't share, but that exacerbated the situation. The wedding was a small and simple affair, a registry office and a pub lunch, followed by a few beers by just very close family and a couple of friends. I was taking photographs. The bride's mood was annoyed at best describe it. Her new husband would put his arm around her and she would push him away. She stated to me she just did not want to be there. More than once she just stared at me in total despair. As a result, he looked despondent at times and almost heartbroken. I didn't think they would see the year out. 15 years later they are still very much together, very much a team and happy. They worked it all out, they learned from each other and they stuck to it. And for me, I couldn't be happier for them. Well, that just swung right around at there. Yes, he proposed drunk and she took it seriously. He clearly wished he could take it back. Big wedding they couldn't afford. He was nervous AF. Everyone there was dressed like it was a BBQ. And were all there to get drunk. As soon as they were married they both had a smoke and a VB in each hand. Classy. Gave it 2 years. Boom, to the day they were divorced. She found another dude and wore the same dress to her next wedding. Bogan AF. Should have just had the wedding at Bunnings then. By OVB. At my cousin's wedding, she came to hang out in my brother's and my hotel room to hang out because apparently her new husband just sat down in the honeymoon suite, put his face in his hands and said something along the lines of, "I made a mistake." They stayed together for 5 years, had 2 kids, and a very angry divorce. So long as they hadn't signed the papers yet, that should have been the end of it. Yes, a coworker. She was constantly telling us stories that made it clear that the guy she was marrying was emotionally and verbally abusive. She would dread him coming to pick her up. I'm not the only one who told her not to go through with it. Sadly, it sounded like her father was also really emotionally abusive and critical, so she'd grown up with that kind of behavior being normalized. They are thankfully divorced now. It was pretty ugly, but she seems a lot happier. Wholesome turnaround. Yes, and unfortunately she was my best friend from high school, college, and I was the maid of honor. Everybody in a 50-mile radius could see that. While they were both nice people, they weren't right for each other. But he loved her, and I got the impression she just kinda wanted a wedding. She filed for divorce 10 months later. She and I eventually drifted apart when my husband and I moved out of state. They wrote their own vows. His were touching and endearing, about how his life was complete now that he was together with her. Hers were a bunch of passive-aggressive, sexist attempts at jokes. "I promise to never let you win an argument. I promise to never let you watch a football game in peace. I promise to leave the bathroom a mess and yell at you about the toilet seat." Wow, that's not even funny. That's just cringy. The groom's family hated the bride so much that they refused to allow her and her family at the reception. So there was a wedding, then 2 separate receptions. Amazingly, the marriage lasted a decade. My cousin and her husband had a pretty lavish wedding, one that seems like it should have been out of their price range. Husband's grandparents are wealthy, so the assumption was that they had paid for it. Well, couple months go by and on Facebook they are posting about their new Maserati they bought. My cousin is a college student, and her husband is in sales. After that they bought a brand new Mercedes and a yacht. Well, turns out they had been running a Ponzi scheme and had defrauded people out of more than $1 million. After they got caught they turned on each other. Husband got 9 years in federal prison, and my cousin got 2 years. Oh, and she gave birth to their child in prison. Both of them are disgusting human beings, so I'd hoped for more time in jail. 9 years in jail is a freaking long time. Because jail is freaking awful. Was friends with a girl. She's bit dramatic, emotional, severe enough that I wouldn't want to date her, but not that bad that I wouldn't be friends with her. She introduces me to new boyfriend. Chill dude, into gaming like I am. Becomes part of our group of gamers and we have frequent LAN parties together. She's always bitching at him about everything. Emotional manipulations. Yelling at him in front of the group of friends. But he sticks around. I have no idea why. Tells me in confidence the one day that he sees her as the right now girl, not the right girl, and will be moving along shortly. Then out of the blue they announce their engagement. WTF, but I thought, whatever. Married and divorced a year later. He's now married to an awesome woman. Been together around 10 years now. One cute daughter. Their first date was my wedding. Bold. Brother wedding. Told him he could walk away. He didn't. Went married long. Best man at his next wedding he asked me if I were going to tell him he could walk away. I said no, this is the one. Been together a long time and married quite a few years. Sounds like you're a good brother. The bride got totally drunk. She sexily danced on the dance floor solo instead of her first dance. Turned the wedding DJ into a karaoke. Started a fight with the best man's girlfriend. At the end of the night then she had to be carried to her room because she was that drunk. We've been happily married for 15 years now, so turns out I was wrong. Well, I'm not gonna lie, you had me at the first half. My brother's wedding. I was up front with my parental units and I saw the bride walking down. She didn't have a smile on her face. I turned to my mother and said this marriage isn't lasting a year. She smacked me in the shoulder and gave me a scowl. Marriage didn't last a year. Mom, I knew you were right. My BFF's wedding. Sad to say, she and her husband never smiled throughout the entire ceremony. The officiator kept saying how they looked like such serious a couple, not how cute or charming, but serious. 2 months later, she calls to tell me her husband was cheating on her, spent their wedding money on other women, and were being evicted from their home because he was spending his paycheck on himself and his extramarital affairs. She is now happily divorced and moving on from her scumbag of an ex-husband. Yeah, former friend got married to his partner of over 6 years, but he was always chatting up other girls online both before and after the wedding. He eventually got fired from a job for sexual harassment. He didn't tell her for a while and she dumped him soon after. He was living at her parents' place. I thought they were doomed alright, but not in the way you're thinking. By their request the priest quoted Revelations because they were hardcore rapture believers. If you want to know what part of Revelations is appropriate for a wedding, the answer would be none of it. In her they joined a cult in the Rockies and disappeared up in the Yukon. This was a ride from start to finish. Yikes. I see a lot of posts here of people claiming the wedding was doomed because the couple got divorced, but I doubt they knew that at the time. I had a wedding invitation that I refused to accept because of this. It was for a high school friend. I knew he had slept with all of the bridesmaids at some point or another. I knew she was constantly cheating as well. There was no way it would be stable. So, I claimed I couldn't get away from my family and sent a modest gift. According to another friend who attended, there was a fight at the wedding reception. The couple ended up annulling or divorcing soon after. I never got the gift back though. Yep, my cousin got married to this guy she'd been dating for a year or so. They had a fairy tale wedding at a plantation in Louisiana. Gorgeous wedding. I turn and look at my mom and say they aren't going to make it. She asks me what made me think that. To which I replied I know for a fact he's gay. He used to help out at band camp when I was in high school and he was very clearly gay, but closeted. He was his most comfortable self when he was hanging out with the dance instructor and they were openly gay. Turns out I was right. They split up like 2 years later because he finally came out to my cousin as gay and wanted to live his best life. The guy was in the military and was being deployed overseas the day after the wedding, so they made an effort to make the wedding extra big and exciting. He was gone for like 7 months or something and they got divorced the week he came back. 4-day camping trip. Wedding was the last day. One of the brides, it was a same-sex marriage, gave her daughter only 2 weeks of notice to travel to the site. There was no flower basket, so the daughter made one out of tree branches and moss. The daughter basically supplied anything missing from the wedding. Despite the short notice, the other bride spent the whole day leading up to the wedding trying and failing to be patient with the first bride while she insisted she would be ready in time. The first bride spent the whole day going off into the forest to smoke pot and just wandering around. As far as anyone could tell, the first bride's daughter spent the whole day doing and helping with preparations that should have been done at least the day before, but ideally months before. Her son spent the whole day reminiscing with her daughter about how she had always been flaky like this. Ceremony delayed to wait for an important guest. First bride was then late to the wedding. After the delay, site is a bit of a hike from the camp. Several members of the wedding party are disabled. Second bride just barely held her composure through the ceremony. Spent the rest of the day in her tent. Immediately after the ceremony, someone in the wedding party started telling the first bride about how someone was talking st about her to her kids. No, your kids were talking about you. Good to know your friends know what your kids look like. And most of the guests seemed to at least dislike the daughter, if not outright hate her. The only guests who didn't were her brother, the second bride, and the two who didn't even know who she was. TL. DR. Poorly planned. Flaky bride. Almost no prep. Inconsiderate of guests. Bride was late. My brother's wedding. Prior. I hadn't seen my brother in years and he was getting married. Sent me a week notice to appear at his wedding. His soon-to-be wife was a bit odd. Really shy, quiet, and had ultra-conservative parents who you could tell didn't agree with the wedding because she should have married a Christian white man and not an atheist Asian man. They always had a snarky comment to me or my mom that we looked like savages. My brother is on the weird side as well. Super frugal, but also super wealthy. I gave it 2 years. They were married for 5 years, and she filed for divorce and ran off with another woman. Cut contact with her family and everything to be a lesbian. Fast forward to this year, and my brother finally opens up about the marriage, saying that they never fought about anything. No arguments, no disagreements about money, children, future, etc. He assumed she was a closeted lesbian and wanted to be free from her family. This is so dysfunctional that it somehow circles back into heartwarming. I am a musician and have played the weddings of many strangers. Here are a few gems. Prior to the ceremony, the groom grabbed my butt. After the ceremony, the bride thanked me for my beautiful music, and also grabbed my butt. Additionally, she seemed far more friendly with the maid of honor than with the groom. To be honest, neither of the newlyweds seemed very interested in interacting with each other. The bride and groom could not agree on a song for their first dance, which is understandable. What's not understandable is that they eventually settled on Someone Like You by Adele. I mean, it's a beautiful song, but come on. The bride was very obviously tipsy, which was not a problem in and of itself, except that the priest made a special note of the groom's years working towards sobriety. The bride actually showed up late with Starbucks. The groom very nearly had a heart attack when they told him she hadn't arrived yet. When she did arrive, she had forgotten to get a drink for him. This was at the rehearsal. The bride had beautiful vows that honestly made me tear up. The groom stole his from a TV show. The bride did not realize this immediately, evidently, although I did witness the moment of revelation during the reception. As I was packing up to leave after the ceremony, I saw the father of the bride and the mother of the groom making out behind some bushes. They gave me $50 not to say anything. I told the groom anyways, and he told me he already knew, but do not to tell his wife. The groom showed up with a gun on his hip to the ceremony. The bride's father was a cop, in uniform, and looked pee. They forgot to bring the check to pay me, but promised to send it within the week. 2 months later, I was informed that they had gotten divorced, so they wouldn't be paying me after all. I have more, and more detail. More. I appreciate your bullet point approach. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.